Folks, hard times are part of anyone's life. I mean, I think everybody has a time when they feel worse than they did before. And so I have some simple recommendations for that. I think one big one when you have a weird interaction with someone is go out and try to be nice today. Go out and get coffee, leave a big tip at the coffee shop, go out and see you message that friend who you sort of, is halfway a friend of yours and message them something nice and ask them how work's been going and be kind. That's a real thing. My second strategy, which is not as common, I think, a strategy, is I read a book about Arctic explorers. By the way, there is always a new one to read. You can always find one. Don't worry about that. They are available. And there something about, you're feeling bad, but in my case, like, I was dealing with some home improvement and I sort of ran out of money on the project and I was all bummed about that. And then I just read about somebody, eating shoes for 2 months, and it really cheered me right up. I wasn't eating shoes. Great. All right, folks, it's time. We're going to do our open telemetry webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. There's a little bit of bobble with the LinkedIn invite, so we may not have a ton of people seeing this LinkedIn Live. Sorry about that. If you were registered for the other event, I will send you a message with the canned version of this video. And thank you so much to the people who watch us on YouTube and the people who check us out after the fact. So many, like hundreds and actually like 1,000 of you on the last video. So that was really cool. Thank you so much. This week, I have the tech head at Nica, Ankit, to talk about this question that I sort of thought I had answers on, but then I realized, like, oh, there's like more subtlety here than I realized. First let's introduce our guest. Oh my gosh, Ankit, say hi to the people. Oh no, you're in that direction. Say hi to the people and tell us what you do at Nica and what you're interested in, and introduce yourself.
Sure. Yeah, thanks for the call, the events and all. Thank you, folks, for coming here. I am Ankit. I handle tech and some of product at Signos. I'm one of the co-founders, and I love the domain of observability, and I'm always up for a brainstorming discussion or how to debug your infrastructure, services, distributed systems. So these are my areas of interest. Feel free to reach out to me on community Slack, or I'm available at Twitter and LinkedIn also.
And something I really love about being part of this community is that there is a discussion happening all the time on the CNCF Slack. Like if you want to have like a college minor in open telemetry, right, and do whatever it is, 12 credit hours in open telemetry, spend a month or two just reading the questions that come through the open telemetry Slack. And people, I mean, I try to help out, but people like Martin Thwaites and stuff are incredibly helpful in there. Some of our own team are helpful. It's really cool. And so this whole show starts with a thread from that on the CNCF Slack and from the, I think, OpenTelemetry collector channel. I don't actually have the thread in front of me at the moment, but that's all right. The question that came in on that Slack was, hey, I want to send my OTLP data via an Apache Kafka queue within my architecture. And maybe I should have had an architectural diagram doing this. This is really the most complex architectural thought that's going to be in this one is, I have my collector somewhere in my cloud, and I want to, or maybe I don't have a collector at this entry point, but I want to enter the data into an Apache Kafka queue and then have a collector read out of that queue and send it on to whatever my data backend is. And on that thread, most people were like, why are we doing this? Let's maybe not do this. And so I want to kind of start there with sort of why would somebody want to use their like Kafka queue within their system to transmit their telemetry data?
Right. So like it's one of the very interesting takes, and I always see some conversations going around tiering of open telemetry collectors versus using a queue. So some points that I thought about may be useful to discuss with all of us is tiering of OTel collectors is always fine, but there are a few pros and cons that we need to keep a like hindsight thought on, so that we enable better monitoring and better transmitting of data to a different backend source. First, like the Kafka like wall or queue, whatever you say, it is very helpful at scale and near to the backend systems that actually deal with the observability data. right? So if you have to handle scale like 100,000 spans per second at the min, or maybe up to a million spans per second from the observability data, and like, and it's perfectly fine to have tiering of hotel collectors even before the data goes into Kafka. The tiering of hotel collectors is very useful near the clients, right? So OTL has an advantage that it is very lightweight and it can have some amount of data that is configurable in memory. Okay, so the more nearer to the client is, the less scale it has to deal with, and it can keep things in memory for short duration of the time. To provide robustness to this system, you need to have some failover mechanism. If what if the remote hotel collector it is communicating to fails, or whatever the backend or the next tier of hotel collectors that it communicates is down for some time? How much of the telemetry data the client hotel collector has to keep in memory, right? So that is a very I would say complex capacity planning you would have to do, or use the default settings. Let's say my tier one hotel collector, we want to hold 10,000 spans of overall. And if the downstream collector is down for a larger period of time, where the client hotel collector overflows the 10,000 spans, then the data is dropped, right? So like these things, and like hotel collectors, second tiers, first tiers, or even third tiers, they are very helpful when there are, I would say, flaky networks or edge devices where the network call might fail, and the small amount of data or some buffer amount of data can be held in the hotel collectors in memory. The Kafka is like a huge bus. It can ingest huge amount of data. The advantage is it provides durability. You can persist the data right directly to the disk. The hotel collectors do not have a provisor, and they have a buffer to keep things in memory. So when things come at scale, let's say you have 500 GB of data that happened during 5 minutes of your downtime, then where would you like to keep it? Do you want to keep it in memory, or do you want to write it to Kafka in the disk directly? It saves a lot of money there, first. And the second is you will have to keep in mind that Kafka scales very well with the amount of data. So it is able to handle the surge of traffic very well, right? So the, if, yeah.
So I have I want to start back at the beginning with my questions there, which is we'll talk about like collector to collector in just a minute, as like this idea that you can put a collector closer to your service. But I want to start with and I I don't disagree that any of this is probably what makes sense, but like at a really basic level, what is the problem with like losing some data from the collector? So we're trying to send, we have our service running right now, right, these should be like asynchronous outbound requests, right? So we have one collector, it's way away from it on the network, or god forbid it's run on some separate service, some other service someplace, so it's just making a request via the internet, via network, out to the collector with its data, and that's faulty, right? That sometimes drops some data. Now it seemed like when a couple people were discussing this, that they were worried about like their services performance as a result. So is that really a concern, that you could have like, okay, because you're getting timeouts and because you're sending this a huge number of requests, you're actually affecting how well this service works for users because it's seeing all this trouble like trying to send its OpenTelemetry data?
Right. It does to some scale. It can be minimized as much as possible, like turning off the logging exporter, or if you are, right, if you have huge amount, like you have not configured it properly, like it will try to keep a lot of data in memory, and it will
Right. Okay.
restrict the application's access to the memory, and hence like applications will slow down, and the logs that you print will also have a lot of noise about the retries of OpenTelemetry collector to the downstream. Right.
Okay. All right. And that totally makes sense. Yeah. I sort of, I was having a failure of imagination there, where I was like, okay, what is, when you have some side effect, web request, normally you don't see like, hey, that's massively affecting your performance. But
Yeah.
you're right. Like one of the things is you really shouldn't be, this is a hot take, folks, but you, to make your application work, you shouldn't be having to fine tune exactly how much telemetry data you're sending, right? Like
Right.
that's we're starting to get to the point where it's like, okay, now I don't want this tool anymore, right? I don't want to add it to my next microservice because I have to fine tune it to make the service work right. So I get that. It's like, okay, we want to have something to grab the data really, really close to where the service is running. But yeah,
Right.
so then the next point is a very reasonable way to do that, and the way that was recommended by sort of the collector community was they said, hey, just run another collector closer to the service, have it make decisions about what it's going to be retaining, what it's going to be sending, have it in some way partitioned off from the actual service so that, yeah, for example, if it's blowing up and using a ton of memory, it's not the same memory allocation for the application. But you're saying that, yes, that's a way to do it, but that it actually totally can make sense to use Kafka. And okay, here was the third question that I had in that sequence, which was, I always understood Kafka as being this, really handling the multiplicity well between subscribers and publishers. And I was like, that superpower does not seem applicable here. Where it's like, I wouldn't probably want to have like, oh yeah, everyone can publish to an observability topic, and you can have multiple other services that are subscribed to them. I'm like, I can't. I mean, I can imagine Netflix or something needing that kind of architecture, but like nobody else can I imagine needing to like have that kind of vendor or system neutral system for. Am I wrong in that? Am I wrong in understanding like that? That's probably not what we're really thinking about with Kafka here.
Right. So I would not say it's just just about being at a Netflix scale. Even at a medium scale, I would say it is a very good practice to have some queue in place. Okay. What it helps in is I have seen two things happen very frequently to any medium scale companies too. Surge of traffic, like the usual day traffic, and some day some marketing event or some event, the data spikes to around 10x, and you don't want your backend to scale up, and by that till that time your services are throwing errors, right? So that is one that Kafka does, or any queue does very good, right? To handle the surge in traffic, right? And the next thing is like it's just like a write ahead log. Just dump it out into Kafka, do any sort of processing you want to, and pick up from where you left, right? So if let's say if you're using a SaaS or in-house backend, if SaaS has rate limits, you in-house backend needs some time to scale up. If the consumers at Kafka can limit that, and it can help you have a consistent load to your backend, either it be database or any rate limited SaaS. So
Right.
those are
So
the very two good
this is
advantages.
where the power really comes in, right? Is that
Yeah.
with, for example, a collector, we have maybe a collector running very close to our services. You're still going to need to do a bit of thinking about, hey, how much memory does this thing have? How is it batching its data sends? Because no, it can't just accept any completely arbitrary amount of data and run super reliably. If you already have a Kafka queue at the center, probably at the center of your architecture, right? It is super reliable, right? In terms of how
Right.
much like it can take this huge burst of data and it will handle it just fine. And so you are adding to the load on that queue, but yeah, like that's something it should be able to handle pretty centrally.
Right.
So are you recommending that people think about queuing even kind of outside of this Kafka space, if they just think like, hey, even with multiple collectors, you might want to think about a queue at the center of your system?
Yeah, definitely. Like if you're talking about a few GBs of data, then it's fine. Like if you're talking about hundreds GBs of data, like you need to have some disk where you can write to. You cannot keep things in memory and like wait for the system to get started. And like downtimes also become very important at that point of time, right? So it's perfectly fine to have tiers of hotel collectors nearer to the application, one at the infra, and like a layer of queue or Kafka before sending it to the backend.
I'll also say that running multiple collectors has one enormous advantage, and I'll send a link to a architecture diagram for this idea down below. But it has one enormous advantage, which is I think for most of us, realistically, you're not going to be talking to the application developers or even the people who do like direct operations with those applications to modify your telemetry data, right? Or that's ideally, right? We certainly don't want to be saying, hey, can everyone make a PR to their service today because I want like one more attribute on your traces that we're getting. Like, we really want to be able to do configuration of our observability system on one side and have
Right.
the application data people, the application code people that worry about their thing, and they don't have to, you don't need them to be able to make a change. And so if you have multiple collectors connected together, your ability to say, hey, this service is overproducing or this group of services is overproducing, I'm going to do some clever stuff, or no, I'm just going to clamp it. I'm just going to say, hey, you can only send this many bytes of data every single cycle and stuff, right? If you have that collector very close to each of these services, then you're able to do that in a very fine-grained way. And so that's like a big advantage totally outside of these
Right.
considerations. It's just that's nice.
It's a very right and like a good angle to look into things.
And then okay, let me look at my big sheet of questions. I like these comparisons, right? Buffer overflowing, certainly we're thinking of. So I actually had misunderstood and didn't really get when I was first looking at this that it actually was super easy to like serialize into a queue with the OpenTelemetry like protocol, the OTLP. Can
Right.
you talk a little bit about that? I know you left some comments on that here.
Right. So to start with, like the Kafka exporters and the Kafka receivers both support JSON and Proto serialization format today, and Avro is yet to come. I see a PR already open, and they would be supporting that serialization format. And like the schemas are almost stable, like they are marked as stable, and it should not be changing much. So it should be good. Like there is no need to much to worry there. And I saw into the issues also that they are looking to support schema registry as options to share schemas between the different uh, producers and consumers. So that is also going to be like help attain much more stability and robustness to this product.
Awesome. So let's dive into, there are some specific Kafka configs to consider when we start talking about options that we have. So I talked a little bit about using multiple collectors and having a collector very close to the service and saying, okay, that there I can configure how I want it to handle my open telemetry data. But you can also use like Kafka is not completely neutral here, right? You can do config to it to modify like how you're collecting data. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Uh, like yeah, so the basically there are a few angles like Kafka does. Like an example would be like that is very relevant to our open telemetry data in general would be like if we need to enable tail-based sampling, what we can do is like the tail-based sampling needs all the traces uh, like under the same trace ID to be present in the OTel collector, in the same OTel collector. That is a very big limitation that we had to deal with, right? And
Yeah.
there have been many architectures around it. But yeah,
Yeah.
so Kafka, like if you can partition by trace ID and write it to a topic, there can be multiple consumers who can read from the different partitions of a topic, and all those consumers can run in parallel with that trace ID as the partition key. Then it helps a lot in managing the tail-based sampling.
So let's pause for a second to just talk about the idea of our partition, right? Is like a section of resource allocation within a Kafka queue, right? Is to say, hey,
Right.
this is how much we're going to devote to, and this makes sense, right? Like, hey, customer payment data being handled by the queue, right, gets a bigger partition than logging user behavior and which was the shoe color that they clicked on the most, right? So this is
Right.
partitioning, and then tail-based sampling, that one probably people are a little more comfortable with, but it's this idea that we want to make decisions about what traces to send and how many of them after the trace has occurred. So head based and tail based sampling, we talk about it a lot, but I always want to get us back to the basics. Like what the heck is like head based sampling is the thing that is sort of always available to us, which is just when a trace
Yeah.
starts, we're like, no, save that one or don't save that one, which, maybe by service or something, we can be kind of smart about it, but it's basically we're saying making a random decision of what are we going to save and what are we going to lose. Tail based is some decision about what's in the trace. And it's sort of been this holy grail for 7 years now in all of the APM and observability space. And so one of the things that can get us a little closer there would be at least saying, hey, where are all these traces coming from? And so there is a PR out there for partitioning, for handling a partition by trace ID. It's not part of mainstream Kafka yet, but it's worth thinking about that. It may be possible to say, hey, let's go ahead and see what's going on in these traces, link them together by trace ID.
Right, that's true. And regarding like how much data can Kafka handle, like there are a few ways to increase the throughput that you can handle, like changing the batch size, like increase it a little bit. There is a linger.ms setting, like how much time should a producer wait to send it out to Kafka, right? And that setting is by default 0 milliseconds. It means like as soon as the producer produces it, it has to send to Kafka. So you can configure that to 5 or 10 milliseconds. A very big improvement can be achieved by changing the acknowledgement in Kafka, right? So if like the producer has a setting to, there are 3 types of acknowledgements, like forget and fire and forget, then wait for the leader to respond back with acknowledgement. And the third one is like all the replicas should respond back with their reception of the data with an acknowledgement, right? So the second one, like if just a leader responds back that I've received the data, it should be fine. So this helps a lot in retries and reducing the time that the Kafka receives the data. These are one, and like always use compression.
I love that, and I think this is great advice for people. I wanted to step to kind of our last question that I had that I think is critical because we're taking up our full time here, which is just talking about this is sort of a footnote here, is that the other thing you do, and also this is what you find, folks, when you try to Google like OpenTelemetry Kafka, is you get a lot of answers about monitoring your Kafka queue with OpenTelemetry. So just want to cover that very briefly, like talking about what are kind of the critical things that you should be monitoring when you're monitoring the health of your Kafka queue.
Right. So Kafka has a lot of metrics. It has brokers, it has producers, it has consumers. I would say like the usual stuff you can like figure out, like the heap memory and like all these things. Apart from that, the few relevant things that you should monitor in Kafka is like consumer lag. That is very important stuff. Like what is the offset that the producer is writing to, and how far is the consumer from reading that data. Like if that lag is increasing, then it like you should check into your consumer services, why are they not able to process that amount of data, or like what is happening there. That's number one. You should check out, like if you're talking about the complete pipeline that OTel collector writes to Kafka, and there is an OTel collector reading from Kafka, you must monitor how much of data is being written to Kafka in each partition, in each topic, how much data is being read by the consumers. Is the OTel exporter failing to write data to Kafka? Is Kafka going through a rebalancing due to like the consumer client's numbers changing, which like can change for a lot of reasons due to restarting of pods, scaling up, scaling down of the consumers and all. So these are the few basic like operational things you must monitor, apart from the general health of broker and the producers.
Yeah, I think it's so critical because right, Kafka's meant to be monitored, meant to be like an operational tool. So of course it generates a ton of signals. But you're so right that it's like if you look at like the default importer for this stuff, right, you see like 30 plus different signals that show up. And when I start thinking about making a dashboard, it's something like Signals that has 30 different things being charted, and you ask someone, you say, "Hey, I think something's wrong with our Kafka queue. What's up?" Right? And you're looking at 30 things, right? It starts to get pretty tough. So, you want to try to keep it to about 4, right? That you say, "Hey, I need to see these top level. Otherwise, we are healthy or we're not." And I'll fool with the time window or something to see if there's a pattern, but you want to try to get, this is a very ground level thing about observability, is that first is the question of, do we have an incident? And 30 metrics is not going to cut it, right? You have to be kind of focused down. And I think consumer lag, right, has got to be a major one, right? Hey, how soon is the consistency happening, right, between producer and consumer is pretty key. And yeah, any slowdown in actually reading the data off the queue is a real question. All right, now I know there are going to be follow-up questions and comments, so please do feel free to drop comments under this video, and we will reply to them via text after the fact of the video. I will pause. We just have a couple of viewers, so I will pause if you want to drop any questions in chat. I will take a look here. Oh, those are me dropping in links. So cool. Those were not questions I haven't answered from the chat. So fantastic. You'll see a few more links down in the chat, especially to the OTel collector contrib repository with the Kafka components that you should check out. But Ankit, are there other stuff that you want people to know, places you'd like them to look you up or get more information about this?
Sure. Like, I am always available in the Signals community, so you can definitely hit me up there. You want to start a discussion. If you want to start a discussion in this, like the GitHub itself, that is also fine.
Yeah. If you have questions about collecting data with OpenTelemetry and using the OpenTelemetry collector, you should absolutely join the CNCF Slack and take a look there. If you're curious about charting all of the OpenTelemetry signals, of your metrics, logs, and traces all in one place with an open source tool, go and join the Signals Slack and talk to us about it. You will not get kicked out for wanting to talk about Grafana or wanting to compare tools or anything, right? Like, Signals is part of your solution for observability, and especially effective. Oh, there was a Reddit thread this week that was like, hey, I really just want to get everything charted together, and I understand that this tool is like the perfect thing to do, logs from Java or something, but my problem is that it's way too many tools and no one's going to check them all, and so I want one thing. So I was like, Signals, baby. In fact, I didn't even have to say Signals. I love it. One of our community members came in and said, hey, you definitely the thing you're describing is Signals. So that was cool. Anywho, we will be back next week with a new topic. I think we're going to dive deeper on the OpenTelemetry API. Maybe we're going to do something that's going to be so fun, but I'm not going to promise which topic it's going to be. I'll get that listed later today. Thank you so much for joining, everybody. We will see you soon.
Bye-bye.